So I thought I'd do a little video on some of the more fun street names of London, because there are so many fun ones to talk about and have a laugh about, given London's very checkered and interesting history. So starting with Bleeding Heart Yard. Bleeding Heart Yard, there's two theories. The first theory is that there was a pub on Charles Street, which was called the Bleeding Heart, and it had a sign of the Virgin Mary on it, where her heart was pierced by 5 swords. Boring. I prefer the second etymology far more. So this is the legend of Bleeding Heart Yard. There was a Lady Hatton, who entered into a pact with the devil in order to secure a mansion in Holborn and riches and high standing. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably do that for a mansion in Holborn. It'd be a bit noisy though. So the legend has it that at the housewarming party for the mansion, the devil turned up and ended up tearing out the heart of Lady Hatton. The stable lad found it the next day on the floor and it was still pumping out blood. So yeah, Bleeding Heart Yard. The yard where the bleeding heart was found. So Love Lane, where the 17th century historian John Stowe wrote that it was so called because of wantons. So in other words, it was the red light district of its time. And another one of a similar ilk was Stew Lane. During the 12th and the 17th century, the banks of the Thames were full of brothels and seedy goings on. Actually, usually I've read more on the south bank than the north bank. Again, continuing with the sordid, we've got Cock Lane, Holborn. This was said to be the only place, if not one of the only places, where prostitutes were allowed to live and carry out their trade. There is a suggestion also that it could have been named Cock Lane after the bird. Smithfield Market is around the corner. However, Smithfield Market was more known for livestock. Had it been a poultry market, then maybe, but the chances are that it had a more sexy connotation to it. Oh, but this one's one of my favourites. It surprised me because I'd heard of the place, but I never put 2 and 2 together that it was in any way rude. So basically, it's Cuckold's Point. So the story goes that it's called Cuckold's Point because the miller came home from work one day and he found his wife in bed with King John. I mean, with any of the kings, and he had to have that name. So obviously the miller was really upset, and King John said, look, you know, whatever you've seen, I'm sorry, and I will grant you as much land as you can see as an apology. So the miller's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And the furthest point that he could see ended up being called Cuckold's Point. But this is the reason. I mean, in those days, you know, there was no such thing as a free lunch. Well, you know, these days there isn't either. But really, in those days, if something was given by a man of, you know, high standing to someone as lowly as a miller, there would usually be some kind of caveat to make it worth the person of higher standing's while, either for money or payback or entertainment. Okay, so the king says you can have all of the land as far as you can see. However, there's going to be an annual fair, okay? So there's going to be an annual fair, and on that fair, every single year, you have to walk to that point with a pair of buck's horns on your head, which would have been massively embarrassing. So, you know, the fair comes around and, you know, all of the miller's neighbours are kind of jealous of the miller's newfound wealth. And his wife must have been pretty fit as well, if otherwise the king probably wouldn't have been sleeping with her. So the neighbours were really jealous of the miller, you know, the playboy miller walking around with the buck horns on his head. And every time that the miller walked all the way to the end of the land that he could see that was now his, they referred to it as him walking to Cuckold's Point, because obviously he had walked in on his wife doing the dirty with the king. I thought that was quite a nice one, and and one that I just simply hadn't clocked as rude or saucy before. And there's loads of places in London that are kind of smelly because they're connected to the fact that there was no proper sewerage system in London at the time. People used to just dump their waste in the street or just chuck it out of the window. Just throw it out of the window. So, you know, that the Thames was the sewer. It had animal poo, human poo, human remains, industrial waste, you know, tar and that kind of thing. So it just must have been absolutely awful. And apparently it stank. Cholera was rife. Everyone was sick. Parliament bought really, really thick curtains, but apparently that didn't help at all. If you ever happen to be walking around the Bank area of London, technically the City of London, near Cannon Street, you might find the rather respectably named Sherborne Lane. I mean, Sherborne Lane, what's wrong with that? Well, 700 years ago, it wasn't called Sherborne Lane. It was called Sherborne Lane, and later changed to Shiteburn Lane, which pretty much says it all. You know, seals the deal on its smelly past. Pudding Lane's kind of an interesting one. So Pudding Lane is supposedly where the Great Fire of London started. That's a theory that's debated, but apparently it was started in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Pudding Lane in those days was not the place that you would go down and get pasties and that kind of thing. Pudding Lane was actually where butchers sold their wares, and actually it got the name Pudding because butchers would go down Pudding Lane to take their offal, so all of the intestines and eyes and blood and the things that people didn't really want to buy, they'd take their offal down to the Thames to be shipped away. So have you ever had a black sausage? Yeah, a blood sausage. So in French, it's called boudin noir. And you can kind of see how Londoners at the time were like boudin, pudding. They basically anglicised it. Boudin, pudding. You know, you can kind of see how it ended up being pudding. So yeah, pudding is from there, and Pudding Lane is not to do with nice puddings. It's to do with horrible sticky offal that no one really wants to eat. Although I quite like some bits and pieces.